man at the front desk stopped me just as I was heading out to my car. "Ma'am," he said, lowering his voice even though the lobby was nearly empty. "I probably shouldn't be saying anything, but do you know someone has been coming here and signing you in and out every Tuesday afternoon?" I didn't understand what he meant at first. I'm 71 years old, and I've lived alone in the senior residence since my husband passed 3 years ago. I come and go as I please. Nobody signs me in or out. Nobody has to. Signing me in and out? I repeated. He slid the logbook across the desk and pointed. My name, my signature, or something close enough to it, every Tuesday for the past 2 months. "The woman says she's your daughter-in-law," he said. "She usually stays about an hour, sometimes longer." I drove home in a daze. My daughter-in-law, my son's wife, the woman who had smiled at me across Thanksgiving tables for 11 years, who called me every birthday, who had given me 2 grandchildren I adored. I could not make sense of it. Why would she be coming here on Tuesdays? I was never here on Tuesdays. I volunteered at the Literacy Center on Tuesday afternoons, had done so for 6 years. Everyone in my family knew that. I sat in my apartment for a long time that evening and tried to think clearly. The first thing I noticed, once I started really looking, was the stack of papers on my writing desk. It wasn't how I'd left it. I keep things in a particular order. My late husband was a bookkeeper, and his habits rubbed off on me over 40 years. The folder of utility statements was on top. It shouldn't have been. I keep that at the bottom. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was 71, not 91. I didn't have memory problems. My doctor had told me that just 3 months ago at my checkup. But then I pulled out my bank statement. I am not a wealthy woman, but I am a careful one. After my husband died, I consolidated everything. Savings, checking, the small investment account his brother helped us set up decades ago. I know my balances. I check them every Friday morning with my coffee. There were 2 withdrawals I didn't recognize. Small enough not to scream at me, but there. $280 in October, $340 in November. Cash withdrawals from a branch across town on a Tuesday both times. My hands were cold when I put the statement down. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking of all the reasons there might be an innocent explanation. Maybe the front desk man had made an error. Maybe the dates were a coincidence. My daughter-in-law was a busy woman. She worked in medical billing. She managed the household. She raised my grandchildren. She had no reason to come to my apartment and go through my papers. She had no reason to take my money. We weren't close exactly, but we were family. You don't suspect family without being very sure. But the withdrawals were there, and my signature was in that logbook week after week in handwriting that wasn't quite mine. I called my son the next morning. I didn't tell him what I was thinking. I just asked if everything was all right at home, how the kids were, whether his wife had seemed stressed lately. He said everything was fine. He mentioned almost in passing that she'd been spending a lot of time helping with some paperwork for you, Mom, organizing my documents, making sure everything was in order. I hadn't asked her to do that. That's very kind, I said. And I got off the phone and sat very still. I am not a dramatic person. I spent 34 years as a middle school librarian. I know how to be quiet, and I know how to be methodical, and I know that jumping to conclusions gets you nowhere useful. So I decided I would not confront anyone, not yet. I would find out what was actually happening first. The following Monday, I drove to the electronics store on Route 9. The young man there was very patient with me. I told him I wanted a small camera, something I could set up indoors, something that would record without a light or a sound, or anything that would announce itself. He showed me 3 options. I chose the one that looked the most like an ordinary smoke detector because I already had one of those mounted on the wall near my front door, angled toward the living room. It cost $160. I paid in cash. That night I mounted it myself, which took me 4 attempts and a phone call to my neighbor Arliss, who is 74 and handles all her own minor repairs and has never once made me feel foolish for not knowing something. She held the step stool steady while I got the angle right. "You going to tell me what that's for?" she asked. "Probably nothing," I said, "but if it's something, I'll tell you." She nodded and didn't press me. That's the thing about friends who've known hard times. They understand that some things need to be handled quietly first. Tuesday, I left for the literacy center at my usual time. I even waved at the man at the front desk on my way out, the same young man who'd stopped me the week before. He gave me a small nod. I did not go to the literacy center. I drove around the block twice, parked in the lot behind the dry cleaners on the far side of the building, and I waited. It was 40 minutes before I saw her car. A gray SUV. My daughter-in-law's car. I knew it well. I'd ridden in it dozens of times, to school plays and holiday dinners and the hospital the year my oldest grandchild had her tonsils out. I watched it pull into the visitor lot. I watched her get out. She was wearing her coat, the long navy one, and she was carrying a tote bag. I felt sick. I drove home the long way, parked quietly, and took the stairs instead of the elevator. My apartment was on the second floor and the stairwell door was around the corner from my unit. I waited there for a long time, maybe 45 minutes, until I heard my apartment door open and close. Then I went inside. Nothing looked obviously disturbed. But I knew my apartment the way I knew my own handwriting, and I walked through it slowly, touching things, checking. The writing desk again. The folders were out of order. A drawer in the kitchen was not quite closed. The small fireproof box I kept in the back of my closet, the one with the extra copies of important documents, had been moved. Not much. Maybe 2 inches. But it had been moved. I sat down in my armchair by the window and thought about my son. He was a good man. I believe that. He worked hard. He loved his children. He had been gentle with me in the years after his father died. But he was also trusting in a way that sometimes made me want to shake him. He believed the best of people because that was simply how his mind worked, and he had never in his life had a reason to do otherwise. She was the one I didn't fully know. And I realized, sitting there, that I had allowed myself not to fully know her because it was easier, because she was pleasant and efficient, and she kept my son's household running smoothly, and I had decided that was enough. It wasn't enough. That week, I went to the bank. I spoke with the branch manager in a private office, and I told her, calmly and specifically, what I had observed. I brought the statements. I told her about the Tuesday withdrawals, the branch across town, the dates. She pulled up my account while I sat there and walked me through the transaction records. The withdrawals had been made with my debit card at the ATM, using my PIN. "Has anyone else ever had access to your card or your PIN?" she asked. I thought about it. Once, about a year ago, I had been sick with a respiratory infection for almost 2 weeks. My daughter-in-law had come over several times to bring groceries. I had asked her to get some cash from the ATM for me because I was too tired to go myself. I had given her my card and told her my PIN, intending to change it afterward. I had not changed it. I am not a foolish woman, but I was sick and grieving, and I trusted her. That is the truth of it. The branch manager was kind. She helped me change my PIN and card number immediately. She also referred me to the bank's fraud department and walked me through filing a report. "How much total?" I asked when we were done. She checked. $620 over the past 2 months. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. That evening, I watched the footage from the camera. It was better quality than I expected. I watched my daughter-in-law let herself in. She had a key. I had given my son a spare key years ago in case of emergency, and apparently he had passed it along. I watched her move through my apartment. She went straight to the writing desk. She opened the bottom drawer and went through the hanging folders methodically, as though she knew exactly what she was looking for. What she pulled out was a folder I recognized immediately, the one with the copies of my will, my power of attorney designation, and the deed to the small lake property my husband and I had owned since 1987. That property, 6 acres in the hill country with a cabin that needed work but sat on land that had tripled in value, was the most valuable thing I owned. She photographed several pages with her phone. Then she put the folder back, adjusted the drawer, and moved to the kitchen. I watched her look through a different drawer. She was reading something, a card it looked like. She photographed that too. Then she left. The whole visit was 41 minutes. I sat in the dark for a long time after the footage ended. She wasn't stealing small amounts of cash because she needed grocery money. She was building towards something larger. I thought about the power of attorney documents. If she had a copy of my signature from those documents and access to my financial accounts, I didn't want to finish that thought, but I finished it. I'm a librarian. I know how to follow a sentence to its end even when the ending is unpleasant. I called a lawyer the next morning. Not the one who had drawn up my will. I wanted someone new, someone she didn't know and couldn't anticipate. I found a woman named, I'll just call her my attorney, who specialized in elder law and financial exploitation. I was in her office by Thursday afternoon. I brought everything. The bank statements, the logbook copies the front desk had allowed me to photograph, the camera footage which I'd transferred to a USB drive, the specific dates and amounts. My attorney was thorough and unhurried. She asked me many questions. She did not rush me or make me feel as though I was overreacting. Have you said anything to your son? She asked. Not yet. She was quiet for a moment. That may be wise, depending on what you want to do. What I wanted, I told her, was to understand the full extent of what was happening before anyone knew I was aware of it. I wanted to know if this was isolated or if it was something more. And then I wanted to handle it correctly, not out of anger, but out of clarity. She helped me set several things in motion. I changed my power of attorney designation to a trusted friend, someone I'd known since we were both young mothers at the same church. I updated my will with my attorney's office. Rather than keeping copies at home, I added a secondary alert to all my financial accounts that would notify both me and my attorney of any unusual activity. And then I waited. It was 3 weeks before the second thing happened. I got a call from a title company. A woman asked if I was confirming my intent to add a name to the deed of my lake property. I had not requested any such change. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about. She read back the request she'd received. A letter, apparently, with my signature, requesting that a name be added to the title as a joint owner. The name was my daughter-in-law's. I said very calmly that I had not signed any such letter, that my signature had likely been forged, and that I needed her to stop all proceedings immediately and document everything she had received. She was flustered but cooperative. I took her name and number and called my attorney within the hour. This was no longer just about $600. My attorney filed a police report on my behalf. A detective came to my apartment, a quiet, matter-of-fact woman about my age, who sat across from me at the kitchen table and listened without interrupting while I laid everything out. She looked at the footage. She looked at the bank records. She looked at the letter the title company had received. This is a good amount of documentation, she said. I'm a librarian, I told her. I document things. She almost smiled. My son found out 3 days before they brought her in for questioning. I told him myself. I drove to his house on a Sunday afternoon and I asked him to sit down and I told him everything I'd found in order with the same calm I'd been holding on to for weeks. I showed him the footage. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Mom, I didn't know." I believed him. His face was the face of a man who had just had something break inside him, and it was not a performance. I knew my son. I had raised my son. I know you didn't, I said. He asked me what was going to happen. I told him what my attorney had told me, that the forgery on the deed alone was a felony, that the financial exploitation of an elder added additional charges, that the evidence was substantial. I told him I was not making the decisions out of anger or out of wanting to hurt anyone, but I was also not going to pretend nothing had happened, because something had happened, and it would have continued happening until there was nothing left for it to take. He nodded. He looked out the window for a long time. Then he asked if he could see his children that afternoon, and I said of course he could, and I went into the kitchen and made us both coffee, and we didn't talk about it anymore that day. My daughter-in-law was charged with financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, forgery of a legal instrument, and unauthorized use of financial accounts. She had a lawyer, of course. She maintained for some time that it was all a misunderstanding, that she had been helping me, that I had given her permission to access my accounts. But the footage was clear. The logbook was clear. The letter to the title company had her fingerprints on the envelope. At the sentencing, the judge looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. He said that crimes against elderly family members were among the most damaging not only financially, but in terms of the trust they destroyed, and that trust, once broken in that way, rarely returned. She received 2 years of supervised probation, community service, full restitution of the $620, and a permanent restraining order preventing her from being within 500 feet of my residence. My son filed for divorce 6 weeks later. I want to be honest about what came after, because people sometimes assume a story like this ends cleanly. It didn't. My son was devastated. My grandchildren were confused and sad. There were months of difficult phone calls and careful conversations with a family therapist who helped all of us find our footing. I worried for a long time that my son would blame me, not consciously, but in some quiet corner of himself that couldn't help it. He didn't. Or if he did, it passed. We are closer now than we have been in years, which is a strange and bittersweet thing to say. I still volunteer at the Literacy Center on Tuesday afternoons. I still check my bank statements every Friday morning. I still wave to the young man at the front desk when I come and go, and he waves back, and neither of us has to say anything because we both remember that afternoon in the lobby when he leaned across the counter and lowered his voice. He probably doesn't know what that moment started. I haven't told him, but I think about it sometimes, how close I came to walking past, to nodding politely and continuing to my car, and never asking the follow-up question that changed everything. My oldest grandchild is 13 now. She called me last month, out of nowhere, just to talk. She told me about a book she was reading and a friend who had been unkind to her and a teacher she thought was funny. We talked for almost an hour. When she was about to hang up, she said, "Grandma, I'm really glad you're okay." I told her I was too. And that is the truest thing I can say about all of it, that I am still here, still careful, still paying attention, because no one is going to look after this life but me.